Hi, everyone. My name is Kim, and I make ugly things on purpose. The story of how I came to make ugly things on purpose, and more importantly, why I want to convince you and everyone to make something ugly on purpose at least once, begins on a rainy Saturday afternoon in 2004. It was about a year after I discovered my first proper hobby, which was knitting. We didn't have influencers back in 2004, but we sure did have trends. And back then was when some creative journalist or another decided that knitting was the new yoga. And maybe it was the same journalist who decided to disparage our grandmothers by comparing our knitting to theirs. And for better or worse, those are the narratives that have stuck around. Those turns of phrase are not what got me into making ugly things on purpose, though, believe it or not. To get to why I love ugliness, and why I want you to love ugliness too, I'm going to start at the very beginning, long before that rainy Saturday 15 years ago. And by the time I get to the end, I am going to have you wanting to make something ugly too. I was not a very crafty kid, aside from spending my summers making friendship bracelets and things like that. I had one of those awful art teachers at some point who told me I should probably go into the sciences. And by the time I was in my early 20s, having fully embraced not being a creative person, I began all the same to feel agitated because I felt like I needed a creative outlet. Of course, I also believed that it was way, way too late for me to find one. So in addition to not being creative, I was pretty certain I didn't actually know how to make anything. Eventually, I got married and moved to a new city in a new country, and a new friend casually mentioned that she was going to be taking a knitting class, and I inserted myself into her plans. For the first time in my life, I had a real hobby, something to make at home whenever I felt like it, or at awkward social situations, or in meetings, or like when I watched rented DVDs from a video store. A year later, that same shop offered a crochet class, and it felt like the right next thing for me to learn. So imagine my surprise when I sat down during that first lesson and discovered that I seemed to already know how to crochet. It took a while for me to figure it out, but it turns out that a high school friend had once taught me how to make a yarmulke. That's crocheted. And my hall director's wife in college had taught me how to make a blanket, crocheted. But it never had stuck with me, and by the time I was 27, I didn't remember ever having even touched a crochet hook in my life. But my hands remembered in that class, and that was, like, delightful. Now, you may recall that the not your grandma's knitting is the new yoga era was also the dawn of the social web. The blogging platform Blogger was hitting the mainstream, and people were starting to realize that the internet could connect people together who liked the same kinds of things. Did you know that knitters formed one of the first niche communities online? They did. And along with the relationships that knitters built through blogs and comment threads, knitting publications started popping up online too. Now, I was not a knit blogger back in 2004 and 2003 when I was learning how to knit, but I did know those blogs were around, and I was an early fan of Knitty.com, the online knitting magazine. So when I learned how to crochet, I went searching for the crochet bloggers and the crochet magazines online. And I found like a couple of purple blinking GeoCities sites with some blurry photos of cats and maybe a doily, which is how I found myself in a bit of a state on that rainy Saturday afternoon in my basement. And that's the day that everything changed for me. It's not quite yet where the ugly stuff comes in, but bear with me. After hours of fruitless searching online, I could not for the life of me understand why there wasn't any cool crochet. It was back in the day when you could have like 0 search results for something. The knitting community was thriving online, but there was no crochet, and it didn't make any sense to me at all. What could possibly be different between these two crafts? So even though I had just learned how to do it, again for the third time, I drew on the HTML I had taught myself from a book when I was in grad school, and I got to work creating a website about crochet. There was nothing on it, obviously, because I didn't know anything about crochet, but I did write a rant. Now, I did not invent the online rant, but I was a really early big fan. And what happened next was that it was like a right place, right time kind of situation, and within a few months, I was working full-time in crochet. I know, right? It was after like the dot-com bust of the early 2000s, but crochet gave me a unique perspective and experience of the dawn of Web 2.0. After posting a link to my rant in a couple of crafty forums, I shut down my computer and went on with my weekend, and then I started hearing from people. I was not the only one, it seemed, to want crochet to have a home on the web. I heard from a yarn store owner in Australia. I got an incredible and impeccable email from a woman in France who speaks English as her third language. I heard from people all over the United States. And so I started publishing their work on my new website. It was like a pattern for a toilet paper cover, not shaped like a cheesy, frilly Victorian doll, but like a sushi roll. It seemed like a tiny revolution at the time. I published articles and tutorials too, and I started a blog for the publication. Now, I did not write a business plan, and I'm not even sure the word monetize existed yet at that point. But I did decide to work full-time on this new website/publication thing because I had a hunch that the money would come. And luckily, I was right. 2 months after I went full-time, I got my first book contract, and a few months after, my second. Eventually, I wrote, as Steffi said, a total of 6 crochet books. Now, if this were a different keynote, it might be about how our work online is by virtue of being accessible to all and public, a living portfolio of all the kinds of skills we have. But this is why ugly things are amazing, so I'm not quite there. I'll get there. About 3 years after I went full-time on what had by then become a for-real online crochet magazine, I was hired to be the editor of Interweave Crochet, a print magazine. It was like a dream job. Things picked up, and I became a crocheter in constant motion. I was a guest and even a host on television shows. I traveled to trade shows and conferences. I was interviewed for the morning news at the ass crack of dawn at the same Chicago studio where Oprah filmed her show. She was not there. 5 years after I went full-time, 2 years after I was hired at Interweave, I burnt out spectacularly, quit my dream job, sold my website, and literally played video games for 8 months. That's a tale for another time. This is the tale, speaking right into that microphone right there. This is the tale of how I came to make ugly things on purpose and to convince you that you should too. This is the tale of what went on inside my mind while I was working as a blogger, online magazine editor and publisher, print magazine editor, and author of crochet books. My role in the industry at that time, beyond my day-to-day tasks, was as like a cheerleader for crochet. I would travel around as the quote-unquote face of the magazine, or I would do book-related events, or I would schmooze at conferences, and I would spout off at the mouth that though crochet was often dismissed and discarded as a tacky or cheap craft or downright ugly, it is indeed a medium of spectacular potential, if only we would harness it. Ugly is as ugly makes, I would say. At the end of my talks and chats and classes, I would inevitably be approached by a crocheter who was far more interested in finding their next project than in discussing why crochet got such a bad rap all the time. These crocheters, giddy from hearing some very enthusiastic cheerleading, would talk about their fear of deviating from what they already knew. They were terrified to try new things, their word. And you know how I responded to this? I was a total asshole. I really was. I would smile, and I would say encouraging things about how, of course, they could do anything they put their mind to, and I would suggest a project that was maybe a little bit out of their comfort zone. And then I would go home, and I would throw my arms into the air and carry on about how anyone could feel fear about crochet. You know what's actually frightening, I would say? Falling off the top of a building into traffic, encountering a hungry bear in the woods, a toddler with a handful of hot dog pieces that haven't been cut in half. Making things out of yarn might feel intimidating, but scary it is not. One day, a few years after I started working in crochet, my friend Ian threw himself a 30th birthday party. It was a crafty party, so I was excited. I had at that point, of course, become a crafts professional. I mean, I still considered myself not to be creative, but I had learned to be quite crafty, at least with yarn. Well, it turns out that what Ian thought of as crafty was not yarn, it was sewing. He'd filled his apartment with sewing machines from all of his friends and bags of fabric scraps he'd scored for cheap and snacks and drink and music. It was appalling. I sat on a lumpy sofa, nursing my drink, feeling as out of place as I had at any number of high school dances and parties half my lifetime earlier. I was certain that my friends would discover that I wasn't really crafty at all, that I was a fraud. Next to me, beside the sofa, was a bag full of fabric, and on top was a piece of fabric that was so ugly, it took my breath away. It was orange and green and white, and that kind of fuzzy fabric where the colored parts are raised against the kind of plain woven white part. I fell in love with the elderly couples that had upholstered entire sofas in it. As I fondled the fabric and sat alone with my drink, I came to a stunning realization. I was scared. After all that time being an insensitive jerk about crocheters' professed fear, I was sweaty in the palms over sewing. I barely knew how to do it. I certainly couldn't sew in a straight line. So at the bottom of my drink, I realized that the reason I was so disappointed in myself at that moment was that I was afraid to make something out of the ugliest fabric I had ever seen. So I decided to make something truly ugly out of it. And I'll tell you what, I don't remember much of the rest of that party at all, and that was the only drink that I'd had. I brought the fabric over to a work table and cut two vaguely identical pieces out of it. I was going to make a doll, you see, a very ugly doll. And once I managed to get the sewing machine threaded, with the help of a friend, I'm sure, though honestly I don't recall, it was as if the rest of the party disappeared. And a spotlight shone just on me and my fabric. It was like I was living in an indie movie. It could have been minutes, hours, or days. Eventually, I stuffed the doll with polyfill, and I didn't fret one bit that my seams were atrocious. I just sewed messy and thick and uneven, and who cared? I found two tremendous glass buttons and hot glued them to my doll's face. Then I crocheted her a scarf, because I knew then that though I had, in my opinion, succeeded in making an ugly doll out of ugly fabric, the doll itself felt gorgeous, and she loved to accessorize. I named her Shoshana. Believe it or not, this was not the moment when I decided we should all make something ugly on purpose. It would be 4 years before I realized that every single adult should make something ugly on purpose at least one time. It was clear, by the way, that it's adults who need to do this, not kids. Kids have an incredible way of making anything they want, and no matter the outcome, thinking it's fabulous. On our way to becoming adults, that glee gets overwritten by self-consciousness, doubt, perfectionism. Now, I'm not interested so much in the psychology of this, but I am absolutely interested in seeing if we adults can't tap back into the unadulterated fun we felt as kids when we made things, like I had at Ian's party. So it was 4 years after that party that I decided that it's my mission for every adult to make something ugly on purpose. I was on the bus on the way home from somewhere. It was nighttime, and I'd kind of been staring out the window in that trance you get into when you're on public transit, and my mind was wandering. And right about the time the bus started pulling into my stop, all those years of thinking and fretting and listening and teaching and cheerleading and arm waving culminated in an urgency I had felt only once before in my life, on that rainy Saturday morning when I had opened up my big fat mouth about crochet on the internet. It was as if I had been struck by lightning. Everyone, every adult should make something ugly on purpose, if for no other reason than to learn for certain that it will not make them die. I ran home from the bus stop, burst through my front door breathless, and announced to my husband that I had had an idea. I named the project Mighty Ugly, registered the domain name, and I wrote up the rules. Then I invited a dozen of my crafty friends over to my house, and I didn't tell them why. When they arrived, they found a table in my living room, and on the table were all kinds of scrap materials. I stuck the rules up on the wall, and I told them I was using them as an experiment to see if this idea was worth exploring. A couple of my friends turned sheet white, and I thought they were going to pass out. A couple of others giggled and dove right in. Over the course of the evening, I learned that my friend Lisa is so hooked on symmetry that she felt queasy making one of the legs of her creature a fraction of a centimeter shorter than the other one. I learned about people's color preferences and what they thought about patterns and textures. At the end of the night, we went around the table and introduced our creatures. My friend Miranda told the most memorable story of all. She told us about a time when she was in grade 1, when her class had collected things like fallen leaves and pine cones and twigs, and they made shoebox dioramas out of them. Best to let you tell this story herself.
When I was in grade 1, we were making dioramas, and we had like pine cones and moss and everything. We went to like a park and like got all this stuff. And I had it was over a couple days, and I had tried to glue down this pine cone using glue, and it wasn't staying because there just wasn't enough of like surface area with the white glue. And it wasn't working. So then what I decided in my grade 1 world, I was like, okay, well, you know what, maybe if I put like a band of glue like over top of the pine cone and like really carefully so that it'll actually stay connected and let it dry, maybe it'll hold on this pine cone. And it actually worked. And so this is a tribute to that. So this has been glued on using glue over top of the device as a band. And the very next time, basically after we finished all these projects, the teacher stood in front of the class and held up my diorama as an example of how not to use glue.
Fail.
So? Yes. So this is FU, this is O.
In my living room that night, Miranda was pissed. That teacher had taken something special and important from her, something she was able to tap back into as she made her ugly creature. With Miranda's blessing, I've told the story lots of times because it's such a spectacular example of the power each of us has to influence other people's willingness to try new things, to innovate, to do something even if they aren't good at it, to help redefine what it means to be successful. Obviously, I decided after the experiment in my living room that I would do as many Mighty Ugly workshops as I could get hired to do. Is this where I go on about the challenge of marketing a project with ugly in the title in an industry that puts perfection on a pedestal? No, it's not. This is where I tell you that I became so convinced about the power of celebrating ugliness that I wrote a book about it. Because here's the thing, ugliness is an inherent part of making things. No matter if it's arts or crafts or friends or dinner, there are always attempts that fail. There are always discoveries of things we didn't realize we didn't know. There are always times when no matter how hard we try, we just don't get it right. Always, always, always. No matter how experienced and skilled we are, no matter if we think we should do better, especially if it's our first attempt. Making ugly things is an inevitable part of making anything. It's just that we don't talk about it. So it becomes something shameful and painful. It becomes a barrier, and it feeds the worry that feeds our procrastination, our creative block. And it doesn't have to be this way. If we shine a light on the ugly parts of our creative pursuits, the parts we usually try to keep in the shadows, the parts that we try to deny exist, we not only allow ourselves to accept them as a part of what we make, we invite others to accept their own ugly bits too. As creators and publishers of instructions and recipes and videos and ebooks and blogs, we can be the lights that shine on this. We can invite our readers and fans into the gorgeous world that opens up when we stop denying that ugliness is a part of creative life. As people who rely on our creativity and ingenuity to make a living, we have our own struggles to contend with perfectionism, self-doubt, fear of failure. It's so easy for us to feel that if we do not create perfection, we will not only fail, we will be a failure. This is where our humanity shoves its face into our daily business lives. Each of us knows, deep down, that before we perfected that recipe, before we figured out the most elegant way to sew pockets into that jumper, before we came up with that invisible seam that's so perfect at the back of a doll we designed, we got it wrong dozens and dozens of times. Think of how our audience feel the first time they've ever sewed pockets into a jumper. They may have our great tutorial in front of them with a gorgeous professional photo showing them what the end result should look like, but they have never done this before, and they're about to do it for the first time. My kid is 8 years old, and he loves doing things he's good at, and he hates doing things he's never done before. I tell my students the same thing I tell him. The gong show you produce the very first time you try to make something you've never done before is absolutely perfect for your first time. We have the power to help ease the pressure our readers and fans feel to match the perfection we work so hard to produce for them. But how? How do we invite ugliness into our businesses that we've built to look seamless and gorgeous and effortless from the outside? How do we do it in a way that doesn't take away from all we've achieved and all we're working to achieve? How do we hold ourselves to our own exacting standards while inviting our fans and readers to have fun and not worry so much about making something Pinterest perfect? I'll tell you. I've come up with a set of 5 guidelines to help us accept and embrace the role ugly plays in our work, so we can invite our communities to welcome ugly into their experiences too. These are not in order of importance. You can do just one or all of them, or save them for when you need a refresher. You'll find them printed on a card you'll get at the end of this talk, so no need to commit them all to memory. So here we go. How to embrace ugliness so you can move through perfectionism and invite your audience to have fun making things with you. Number 1, accept that perfect is boring. What is perfection anyway? Never mind, it doesn't matter. What matters is what we find imperfect and why we refuse to let it be a part of our work. Because here's the brutal truth of it. Perfection is fiction. After my book came out, I went on a book tour with a couple of other authors. Our events were panel discussions, and they were loads of fun. We were all fascinated by the stories of makers, artists, and crafters. We were desperate to learn what made someone feel compelled to create something, what story they were telling, what point they were making, what technique they were obsessing over. And I specifically was hungry for the stories of what people weren't trying, what projects they would fantasize about but never actually make, and why. We would take questions at the end of these panel discussions, and by the 3rd or 4th stop on our tour, I found that I kept saying one particular phrase over and over and over again. Pinterest is fiction. This was back in 2014, so Pinterest felt newer then than it does now, and it was everywhere. Pinterest made people feel inspired, and it made people feel terrible. And I would sit there at a long table in front of a group of people, and I would bang on it. Because Pinterest doesn't tell a story. It only skips ahead to the happy ending. Because Pinterest doesn't tell a story, when our readers look at the stunning images on there, all they think about is that they want to make something as stunning as that. They don't think about the dozens of failed attempts that came before that stunning image. They don't think about the years we, the makers, spent learning and practicing our skill. They don't think about the power of photo styling and all the dust bunnies and piles of laundry and dirty dishes they can't see outside the frame. It's a coincidence that I started Mighty Ugly the same year Pinterest launched in 2010. But the rise in popularity of Pinterest has made me that much more enthusiastic about the role ugliness plays in our creative experiences. Because ugliness, as I've said, plays a huge role in our creative experiences. Now, when I talk about ugliness, I mean for it to encompass not only what a finished project looks like, but also broken projects, failed attempts, cakes that fall or catch on fire. Ugliness is what we avoid so hard. We avoid making ugly things to the extent that sometimes we don't even start to make something. Ugly looms in the background, shutting us down. This is as true for us as it is for our readers and our fans. But ugliness shouldn't stop us, because we can't have everything else that we create without occasionally also having ugliness. We just can't. We can't learn to perfect a skill until we learn how to be okay being terrible at it for a while. We can't experience the bliss of making exactly what we wanted to make unless we also know the disappointment of failing. We can't appreciate what others make if we can't understand how hard it is for them to get that thing just right. Ugliness is a part of every act of creation, even if it's behind the scenes. Valuing only perfection makes everything boring. Perfection does not come with an interesting story. Perfection doesn't include the special stuff we as human beings connect with on a visceral level. It's imperfect to pour a sauce over a plate of pasta and have it splatter on the edge of the plate and even on the table. So we clean that sauce right up when we're gonna snap our photo for Insta. I'm gonna take a leap though, and make the grand assumption that when we're rushing to get dinner on the actual dinner table, and one kid is screaming and we just got a text from our spouse that they're gonna be a half an hour late, and the dogs decided to start chewing on the baseboard moldings, we're gonna pour that sauce onto the plate and the splatters are gonna go unnoticed. Those splatters are real life. And real life is never, ever perfect It's simply real life. I bet some of you have a mental image of what that dog looks like, the one that's chewing on the baseboard moldings. That's because you folks are dog people. And you know that having a dog at home invites quite a lot of imperfection into your life. Every imperfect moment is a memorable one. Every one represents a moment of richness that creates one tiny bit of the fabric of our lives. My family got a puppy last fall. One night, about a month after we brought him home and we were finally confident he was house-trained, our son was epically stalling at bedtime. My husband and I were losing our minds. Eventually, in unison, as if the universe had conspired to put us exactly in sync, both of us yelled at the same time, "Put on your pajamas and go pee." At which point the puppy squatted right on our shag carpet and peed. The times when things go perfectly are not the times we remember years later. They are not the ones that bring us closer to the people we share those flawed moments with. We remember the times we run out of gas on the interstate. We remember the cakes that fell. We remember the time we yelled at our son to go pee and the dog squatted on the shag carpet. We remember sitting at a party and feeling totally awkward and deciding to make something ugly as a way to break the tension. A Pinterest perfect photo of a project you slaved over is a stunning marketing asset. Of course it is. But is it interesting? Is there something about it that will be memorable to the people who are viewing that image? Is there something about it that people can relate to? Perfect photos are lovely, but your imperfection is gorgeous. Number 2, show your hand, AKA this ain't poker. I used to follow an illustrator on Twitter until I realized I felt stressed out every time she showed a photo of her work. Why would her work stress me out? Because it was perfect. Super clean lines, everything measured perfectly for symmetry and balance. Eventually, I realized that what stressed me out was that every time I looked at her work, I felt like I wasn't seeing any of her in it, and I kept searching and searching for it. Each of her pieces could have been entirely computer generated. There was no personality to it, nothing that tied all her work together in a way that made it clear that she, and only she, was the one who could have made it. Creating original work, whether it's art or craft or food, is an expressive act. In each thing we make, we have an opportunity to say something. Maybe that something is, "Oh man, I just cannot get enough cinnamon these days." Or maybe that something is like, "Join me in fighting the patriarchy." Small or big, personal or global, a part of us becomes a part of what we make. And we gain nothing from hiding those unique and special things we bring to our creations, except a gnawing fear that we're conforming to some external standard that we may not actually be very comfortable with. Making things and blogging about it is not like poker. There is no good reason to hold your cards close to your chest. There's no good reason to always keep a straight face. There is something that motivates you to do what you do and to make what you make and to share it with the world. Do you let that something shine through into your work, or do you hide it? What would happen if you let the unique things about yourself become one of the key features in the work you do? Or let's put it a different way. What would happen if you stopped holding that part of you back? I don't do Mighty Ugly full-time. Primarily, I work as a writer. And for the years I ran my crochet website and then worked as the editor of a print magazine, I was a persona in public, not really myself. I was that enthusiastic cheerleader who demanded people consider crochet to be the amazing craft that it is. But I had a secret. And the more years that passed, the more that secret felt like a burden. Much of my motivation to do that work, you see, was not actually a love of crochet, though I did love it and I still do. Much of my motivation was as a feminist. This was not something I felt like I could be open about at the time. It wasn't something I felt my audience would appreciate or even consider relevant. But even so, I woke up every morning eager to get to work in crochet because crochet provided me an avenue to speak with women about finding their voices and learning to express themselves. When eventually I burnt out and walked away from crochet, I agonized over what I would write about next. I was certain that if I were to say farewell to my persona, along with my work in crochet, that if I were to just be me with my flaws and my opinions and my steadfast belief in the value of every single individual's voice, that my readers and fans would not just unfollow me and go quietly to follow someone else, but that they would hate me. I did it, though. Slowly over time, I stopped hiding the things that drive me to do the work I do. I'm sure I've lost some folks along the way, but I never did receive hate mail for it, and I never did feel like a failure for it. And once I started being my whole self in my work, only then did I start connecting in meaningful ways with the people I was writing for. Only once I started to really show my own hand in my work, to make things in such a way that only I could make them, because I was putting my own unique motivations and aesthetics into them, only then did I feel like I was truly doing meaningful work. You bring something only you have to everything you do. Don't hide it, don't deny it's there, and don't diminish its value. Show it. In doing so, you will show your audience that opinions are normal and that it's okay to have different ones from people whose work you respect, that flaws are normal, that finding your voice and your style is something that can only happen when you experiment with both, that tapping into what you love and value the most is a totally appropriate and even liberating way to approach making things. Number 3, celebrate mistakes because you can. I told you how unsympathetic I was when crocheters told me they were afraid to try crocheting new things. I laid out what real scary things might be. There are so many aspects of our lives that are downright terrifying, that warrant our worry and our concern and our vigilance. One realm that is a huge, amazing exception to this is our hobbies. Unless our hobbies like skydiving or swallowing swords or something like that. In our hobbies, the consequences of making mistakes are minimal compared to the consequences of making mistakes in the parts of our lives that are far more delicate or precarious. This is one of the amazing gifts of having a hobby. Hobbies provide us the opportunity to royally screw up, to swallow the pain of having screwed up, to decide what we'll learn from it, and to move on. These are all skills that would be good to have in the rest of our lives too, and practicing them in our hobbies gives us a lower stakes chance to get good at it. Now, we aren't in this room as hobbyists. We're in this room as business people. The stakes of screwing up in our businesses are many, and they are major. But we still screw up, obviously. Hands up if you've had a moment in your business when your chest felt tight because you were certain you had screwed things up so badly that people would run screaming or nobody would ever work with you again. No, like seriously, way up. High, put them, okay. If you remember one thing from, no, keep them up. If you remember one thing from this conference, remember all the hands up right now. People screw up. Okay, thank you. Put your hands up. Hopefully, we've taught ourselves over the years to celebrate our wins. I hope we've become comfortable patting ourselves on the back when our new landing page goes out like gangbusters, or we finalize a new partnership with a company, or we're approached with an amazing opportunity. And now we know, on the flip side, that all of us also make mistakes. What would happen if instead of feeling shame for those screw-ups, we felt proud of them? What would change for us if instead of grieving what might have been if we hadn't screwed up, we celebrated the mistakes we make? Imagine the freedom. Because if everyone makes mistakes, what's the point in feeling shame about them? You are going to mess up. Of course, we all work hard to avoid messing up, but we also know deep down that we're gonna do it. Sometimes it's the little tiny things we do every day that we mess up about, but most of the mistakes we make, the chest-tightening mistakes, they happen when we're trying something new. So many of the new things that we try will not work out the way we want them to. I read somewhere that James Dyson, the vacuum guy, failed to make his special vacuum motor work thousands of times before he finally got it right. Specifically, he failed 5,126 times. Think he sits around struggling to consider himself a success because he failed so many times? No, he does not. When I read that about him, I literally threw my hands up in the air. I was like, yes! because that guy has it right. That interview I read did not involve an apology for the mistakes that he had made along the way. The interviewer didn't have to drag it out of him like Barbara Walters making a celebrity cry on national television. Now, maybe it's just my memory working magic on this, but I'm pretty sure he was bragging about the thousands of attempts he had made that had failed. Bragging. I want us to brag about our mistakes because we can. And not only can we train ourselves to see the beauty in our mistakes, as we relax into the absolute truth that mistakes are how we learn about our work and our businesses and the things we create, we can give our audience that gift as well. Which leads me to pull back the curtain. Not long after my agent told me about all the publishers that had passed on my book about making ugly things on purpose, she found me the perfect smaller publisher just a few hours from where I live in the Pacific Northwest. The first conversation I had with my editor was over the phone, and he asked me something or other about social media. He wanted to know what kinds of tweets I wrote that get the most traction. Is it when I write things about making ugly things or share some mistakes I made? And I laughed right into the phone. No, I said. The most engagement I ever get on social media is when I mention something like my kid barfed in my hair or I talk about the Oxford comma. I almost heard him blink across the telephone line. He was like, "Doesn't that take away from your authority?" So I filled him in. Sure, people know my work because I make ugly things on purpose or because I taught them how to crochet, but they feel compelled to talk with me when I make it abundantly clear that my experiences are just like theirs, or that I have opinions about things they also feel strongly about. I have washed kid puke out of my hair. So have many of them. It's not related to my work, but it is related to the space I take up in this world. I am not just a talking head who's decided to make up my own career peddling ugliness everywhere I go. I am a human being whose kid pukes on her, who feels super stressed out about bookkeeping, who occasionally sits down to make a masterpiece I dreamt up while I was walking the dog and instead makes a hideous mess. This was kind of like a revelation to my editor, but it had become something by that point that I relied on, and I still rely on it in my work. I am not some kind of bona fide expert on the importance of ugliness. I am certainly on a mission about it, though, and now you know that I can go on and on and on about it. I could spend hours every week writing 240 character nuggets of real truth about ugliness and shame and creative liberation. I could, but I get my point across way better when I just talk about the mistakes I myself have made, or about the messes in my life that are the same kinds of messes in loads of other people's lives. Some serious #real talk does not tarnish whatever kind of reputation I may have as a professional in this world, and it won't tarnish your reputation either. When Dorothy finally found the Wizard of Oz, pulling back the curtain was a huge disappointment for her. But it would not have been a disappointment if the wizard had just been honest in the first place and not pretended to be larger than life. If he had pulled the curtain back himself and let people peek inside his reality, he just might have garnered the respect that makes a true leader out of someone. Don't spend your energy worrying that someone might someday pull back the curtain on you. Invite your audience in for a peek inside. Number 5, embrace the pain. I know better than to think this keynote will change your life. You're not going to leave here relieved of your shame or guilt or embarrassment or self-doubt, and I won't leave here relieved of mine either. But I do hope that you'll leave here knowing we are all in this same boat together, no matter if we're just starting out or if we're at the top of our game, no matter if we have the fewest or the most Instagram followers in the known universe. Each of us struggles with at least one part of our business. Some of us are so stymied by keeping our books we live in fear of an audit. Some of us take terrible photos. Some of us failed grade 10 English, and we're certain we can't write anything at all that's good. Some of us don't feel our work is worth getting paid handsomely for, or even fairly. For each of us, it's at least one, probably more of these and many other things. But what if instead of beating ourselves up about feeling these terrible things, we embraced that pain? What if instead of hiding in our shame, we asked for help? What if instead of suspecting deep down that we're undeserving of success because of these struggles we have, we stop hiding the struggles and start sharing about them? Mighty Ugly changed only a small part of my life. It's the thing that made me realize that I was doing myself no great favors by denying and denying that I'm a creative person. Mighty Ugly liberated me from that. But the big change for me came much earlier than Mighty Ugly. The big change came when I explained to my audience that I was leaving crochet, when I quit my magazine job and went to play video games. I mentioned earlier that I was convinced people would hate me when I did that they would feel let down by me. Really though, my biggest fear was that they would believe about me something I was fairly certain was true, something I was deeply and profoundly ashamed of. I was afraid they would know that I can't finish anything I start, that I can't focus well enough to become an expert in anything. I was afraid that they would consider and learn about me that I was a serial failure. There was nothing I could do but be honest, though. So I wrote a blog post about how burnt out I had become and why, and how it felt and how it fit into the many other experiences in my life. When I hit publish on that post, my hands were literally sweaty. And I'll tell you what, not one person said any of those things to me. In fact, I heard the exact opposite of anything I could have imagined. I heard from dozens and dozens of people who told me they felt exactly the same way I felt, who felt so much relief and gratitude for my honesty about my experience because that honesty let them know they weren't freaks and they weren't broken and they weren't alone, which they now knew simply because I had written about how I had felt like a freak, how I had felt like I was broken. That is the experience that changed my life. Not only because it showed me that I am never, ever alone in my doubts about myself, but also because it showed me that if I share of my own experience, then sometimes, if I do it just right, and the stars align just so, I can create an incredibly meaningful connection with others who struggle with similar problems. Since that day 11 years ago, I've known that when I feel that special, awful kind of pain in my gut, that pain of doubt and terror, no matter how miserable it is, it's a gift. That pain is a signal to me that I'm doing something daring, no matter how big or small. It's a reminder to me that I may succeed or more likely fail, and my failure may be truly extraordinary. I've learned to sit with the pain in my gut, to thank it for letting me know not so subtly that I'm onto something, for better or worse. And then I do my own thing anyway, knowing because of that pain that it's an important thing to do. Sit with your discomfort. Know the pain means that you're growing. Failures, small or big, are what we learn from. From them, we move on to do better things, or bigger things, or more impactful things. I make ugly things on purpose sometimes, to remind me that imperfection is fascinating, to remind me that making something ugly does not make me a failure, to show the world that behind every perfect Pinterest project is a pile of mistakes and failures that were worth making. As you pack up your notes and your swag and your piles of business cards today and prepare to go back to work, to put everything you've learned here at this conference into practice, I hope you'll spend a few minutes on Monday morning pulling the scraps out of the bags that are being distributed right now. Grab some glue and some scissors and make an ugly creature out of it. Learn from doing so that it will not kill you. And tell some folks so they'll know it's safe to make ugly things sometimes too. Thank you.